Hello, and welcome to the channel. In today's video, we'll be looking at a case which has remained unsolved for over 75 years. The Sodder family would fall victim to a house fire on Christmas Eve 1945. Officially, the fire claimed the lives of 5 of the 9 Sodder children. However, as time went on, the parents began to suspect that something wasn't right, and that perhaps they had fallen victim to an arson attack designed to snatch their children as their timber-built house burned to ash. In order to understand why Father George and Mother Jennie Sodder believed this, we'll be looking at the history of the Sodder family, the events that took place on that fateful night, and the many questions that were raised throughout their own personal investigation. But before we get into the case, if you're new here and you have a keen interest in true crime cases, hit the subscribe button and click the notification bell, as this is what the main focus of this channel is. The aim is to upload as often as I can, but I also regularly livestream crime-related gameplay so I can interact with you and the wider community. If you'd like to submit your suggestions to me, as well as discuss cases with myself and other people, while also trying to solve crimes, I look forward to seeing you there. Now let's begin today's episode. Giorgio Sodder was born in Tulla, Sardinia, Italy in 1895. In 1908, and at 13 years of age, Giorgio immigrated to America with his older brother. However, when he arrived at Ellis Island, Giorgio's brother immediately turned around and went back to Italy, leaving the younger teenager alone in the land of opportunity. He would soon change his name to George Sodder and begin to find work. George would soon find employment in Pennsylvania, where he would work on the railroads, carrying water and supplies to those working there. He would later take up a job as a haulage driver in Smithers, West Virginia. It would be in this job that George would learn the tricks of the trade. George saved money and studied the workings of the haulage industry, eventually finding himself in a position where he was able to set up his own trucking company. His company at first hauled dirt to construction sites, but later evolved to hauling coal that was mined within the local region. It was here in Smithers that George met Jennie Cipriani through her father, who was a storekeeper in Smithers. Jennie herself was an Italian migrant who moved to the United States at a young age with her parents. After meeting George, the pair would fall in love and eventually marry. The couple moved to a 2-story timber frame home in Fayetteville and had their first child in 1923. The pair would go on to have 10 children. At the time, the local population had a large Italian demographic. George's business would continue to grow, and the Sodders would quickly become one of the most well-respected middle-class families in Fayetteville. While the family was respected, this wasn't without controversy. It was said that George was very secretive about his past and did not speak about his life prior to moving to America. Furthermore, he was also said to be a very outspoken individual. He was not shy in expressing his opinions, even if it meant alienating others. In particular, George was a fierce critic of then Italian Prime Minister Benito Mussolini. This led to tensions within the Italian community, as many were offended with George's views of the fascist dictator. These tensions would escalate after Mussolini was executed in April 1945. 6 months later, in October, the family were visited by an insurance salesman looking to strike up business. George would swiftly decline his proposal, leading to the salesman losing his temper and exploding at George, telling him that his house would go up in smoke and that his children would be destroyed. The salesman told George that this was because of, quote, "the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini," end quote. Soon after this encounter, another man visited the home, seemingly searching for work. While there, he mentioned to George that the fuse boxes at the back of the home could cause a fire one day. This puzzled George, as he only recently had the house rewired after installing a new electric stove. The wiring was also signed off as safe by the local electricity company who carried out the work. George declined the man's suggestions and sent him on his way, believing the man was making up the excuse of faulty wiring to score some work. As Christmas drew nearer, the Sodders' eldest sons noticed a car that they didn't recognise parked on the main highway which went through the town. They said that the people inside the car were watching their younger siblings while they were on their way home from school. However, this would pale in comparison to the horror that the family would experience on Christmas Eve, 1945. George and Jennie's eldest daughter, Marion, had returned home after working at a dime store, where she surprised three of her younger sisters, Martha, 12, Jennie, 8, and Betty, 5, with presents that she had bought for them. Naturally, the unexpected gift of toys sent the young girls into excitement. They pleaded with their mother to stay up later than normal so that they could play with them. Jennie agreed to this at 10 p.m, on the condition that both Maurice, 14, and Louis, 9, would stay up to put the cows in and feed the chickens before they went to bed. She then took the youngest child, Sylvia, who was only 2 years old, and herself to bed for the night. George and her two oldest boys, John, 23, who had returned home for Christmas after serving in World War II, and George Jr., who was 16, were already in bed at the time after spending the day working together. At around midnight, Jennie was awoken to the phone ringing in George's office. Jennie stumbled out of bed, went to the office, and answered the call. On the other line, Jennie heard a woman and what seemed to be other people chatting in the background. The woman asked to speak to someone whose name Jennie did not recognise. When Jennie informed the woman that she had the wrong number, the woman on the phone laughed strangely before abruptly hanging up. While this was an odd experience, Jennie didn't think much of it, but before she went to bed, she noticed that while she was the only person awake in the house, all the lights were on, the curtains were left open, and the front door was unlocked. Jennie shut the curtains, locked the door, and switched the lights off, thinking that her children had simply forgotten and headed back to bed. At around 1:30 a.m, just as Jennie was slipping back into a deep sleep, she heard an object landing on the roof of the home before rolling down the side of the building. It was only moments later that Jennie smelled smoke. The house was on fire. Jennie frantically shook George awake and alerted him of the fire. The pair ran out of their bedroom to find the hallway completely filled with smoke and flames covering the stairway which led to the children's bedrooms. George and Jennie shouted for their children and called for them to flee the house urgently. Once they were outside, they were horrified to learn that only 4 of the 9 children had managed to escape the blaze. George had initially tried to break a window to regain entry into the home, but injured himself when he sliced his arm on the broken glass. He was also beaten back by the intensity of the fire and was unable to see through the thick smoke consuming the family home. George was now in a panic. Knowing his children were still inside, he planned to get them out through the top floor window, using a ladder which he always kept standing on the side of his home. However, when he got there, he was shocked to discover that the ladder was not in its usual resting spot. Confused, George quickly thought to pull one of his 2 trucks to the side of the house, where he could climb and assist with helping his children out the window. Only when he tried starting both trucks, none of them would start. This was the worst timing possible, as both George's trucks were in good working order as recently as the previous day. The family were horrified to learn that there was nothing they could do but watch their home burn. While this was going on, George and Jennie's daughter Marion raced to a neighbour's house to call for the Fayetteville Fire Department. She managed to alert the neighbours, but when they tried to call through, they got no answer. Unbeknownst to Marion, another neighbour had also seen the inferno and made his way to a local tavern in order to contact the fire department, but again, there was no answer. This neighbour then rushed into town and tracked down Fire Chief F.J. Maurice. Maurice initiated Fayetteville's phone tree system to alert firefighters of the situation. Allegedly, Maurice was unable to drive the fire truck, and as many were volunteer firefighters who were away celebrating Christmas at the time, responding to the emergency was terribly slow. Despite just being 2.5 miles away, the crew arrived at the Sodders' location at 8 a.m. Christmas morning. The fire, which only lasted 45 minutes, had long burned the house down to smoking ash. The Sodder family, understandably, were resigned to the fact that 5 of their children had perished in the fire. However, a search of the ruins revealed no trace of Maurice, Martha, Louis, Jennie, or Betty. Fire Chief Maurice suggested that the intense heat could have resulted in temperatures hot enough to completely incinerate the bodies, a claim which George and Jennie didn't initially dispute. Following a brief investigation at the property, police determined that the fire was caused by faulty wiring and that the children had indeed died in the home. George would soon cover what would have been the basement in dirt, with the intention of creating a memorial to remember his children by. It wouldn't take long before George and Jennie would begin questioning the official report into the deaths of their children. They wanted to know how faulty wiring was to blame for the fire, when Jennie stated that the lights were working shortly before the blaze, as well as seeing lights still working in the house during the fire. Surely if there was faulty wiring, there would be no lights. This played on their minds. As well as this, was the sheer lack of human remains found on the property. While they recognised that there may not be complete remains, surely there would be something. Furthermore, there were no reports suggesting the family or anyone who arrived on the scene on the morning after smelled burning flesh. George would eventually find the missing ladder, which was hidden in an embankment near the home. Jennie would go as far as to conduct her own experiments, burning the remains of animal bones, chicken bones, beef joints and pork chop bones, just to see what would remain after they were set on fire. Each time she was left with charred bones. Jennie would visit a crematorium where a staff member would tell her that even after a body is burned at 2000 degrees Fahrenheit, just over 1000 degrees Celsius, for 2 hours, there would still be bone fragments which would remain. To put this into contrast, the Sodder home burned to the ground in just 45 minutes. This indicated that the fire was a violent one, intensified by the timber framing, but it wouldn't have been burning anywhere near long enough to completely destroy the remains. George and Jennie began to look into this deeper. A telephone repairman would inspect the wiring and tell George that it appeared to have been cut and not burned as officially stated. Additionally, while the family were visiting the memorial, their daughter Sylvia found a green rubber object in the yard. Jennie remembered the thud on the roof which woke her, as well as the rolling sound. George would inspect this object and determine it to be a pineapple bomb. The family now believed that this wasn't an accident, but that it was an intentional attack on the family. And it wouldn't be long before witnesses began coming forward. A bus driver would come forward and describe seeing what he believed to be fireballs being thrown onto the roof of the Sodder home on the night of the fire. Another woman claimed to have clearly witnessed the 5 children in a car which she didn't recognise, going away from the home as the fire was ongoing. There was also another woman who said that she had served breakfast to the 5 children and an unspecified number of adults at a diner approximately 50 miles west of Fayetteville on Christmas morning, just hours after the fire. There was even a report of 4 of the 5 children being spotted with 4 adults at a hotel in Charleston, South Carolina. Allegedly, the woman who had seen them recognised the children from photographs which were printed in newspapers. When she approached them, the adults became aggressive towards her and ushered the children away, not allowing the woman to speak with the children. The woman described the 4 adults as being 2 men and 2 women, all who appeared to have an Italian background. Armed with this information, George and Jennie Sodder returned to the police and demanded a more thorough investigation as to what happened on the night of the fire. However, the police refused. They were satisfied with the original coroner's inquiry and were convinced no crime had been committed. In 1947, George and Jennie even wrote to the FBI asking for them to investigate. They would receive the following reply from J. Edgar Hoover. "Although I would like to be of service, the matter related appears to be of local character and does not come within the investigative jurisdiction of this bureau. Hoover's agents would say that if they received permission from the local authorities, they would assist. However, their offer would be declined by the Fayetteville Police and Fire Department." Desperate, the pair turned to private investigator C.C. Tinsley for his assistance. While investigating, he learned that the insurance salesman who had threatened George and his family shortly before the fire was actually a member of the coroner's jury who deemed the fire to be accidental. Furthermore, he had caught wind of a rumour regarding Fire Chief F.J. Maurice. According to a Fayetteville minister, while Maurice claimed that there were no remains found, Maurice had told the minister in confidence that he in fact discovered a human heart among the ruins. He allegedly placed the heart in a dynamite box and buried it at the site. Tinsley spoke to Maurice and convinced him to show him the location of the heart. Maurice eventually agreed, and together they dug up the box and took it to a funeral director who examined the remains. However, it was discovered that the human heart was in fact beef liver, which showed no signs of fire damage. The Sodder family would learn of rumours that Maurice had actually not found any remains, but instead purchased the beef liver and buried it, in the hope that should the family find any remains, this would be enough to satisfy the family that their children were dead and put an end to their investigation. As time went on, George came across a photo of school children from New York City in a newspaper. He believed that one of the children bore a striking resemblance to his daughter, Betty. Convinced that she was his daughter, he travelled by car to Manhattan and eventually tracked her down, although the child's parents refused to let George see the child. By August 1949, George decided to conduct a fresh search at the site of their old home. He brought in Oscar B. Hunter, a pathologist from Washington, D.C. George carried out a thorough excavation of the site and uncovered many small items, including damaged coins, a partly burned dictionary, but most importantly, bones. Hunter took the bones and sent these to the Smithsonian Institution. After examining the bones, they issued the following report. The human bones consist of 4 lumbar vertebrae belonging to one individual. Since the transverse recesses are fused, the age of this individual at death should have been 16 or 17 years. The top limit of age should be about 22, since the centra, which normally fuse at 23, are still unfused. On this basis, the bones show greater skeletal maturation than one would expect for a 14-year-old boy, the oldest missing Sodder child. It is, however, possible, although not probable, for a boy 14.5 years old to show 16 to 17 maturation. There was no evidence to suggest that the bones had been exposed to fire. The report also noted that it was very strange that no other bones were found in the allegedly careful evacuation of the basement of the house. They would have expected there to have been full skeletons, given that the house only burned for 45 minutes. It was determined in the report that the bones likely came from the supply of dirt George used to fill in the basement while creating the memorial for his children. The report would trigger 2 hearings at the Capitol in Charleston. However, it was ruled by Governor Okie L. Patterson and State Police Superintendent W.E. Burchett that the Sodders' search for their children was hopeless. The case was declared closed. However, George and Jennie were not deterred and erected a billboard near their former home along Route 16, showing pictures of their 5 children. The Sodders also offered a reward of $5,000 for the safe return of their children, although this would eventually rise to $10,000. A letter arrived soon after from a woman in St. Louis who claimed that the Sodders' oldest daughter, Martha, was in a convent there. On another occasion in Texas, someone came forward claiming to have overheard a conversation in a bar where a man was discussing a fire in West Virginia in an incriminating manner. Finally, another rumour sprung up in Florida, where someone alleged that the children were in fact staying with a distant relative of Jennie's. George would investigate every lead and travel to the locations, but sadly each time he came back with nothing. The leads then stopped for almost 20 years, until one morning, Jennie would find an envelope addressed specifically to her. The envelope was postmarked in Kentucky, but contained no return address. When Jennie opened the envelope, she found inside a photo of a man who looked like he was in his mid-20s. On the back of the photograph, there was a handwritten note which read, "Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. Lil boys, A90132 or or 35. This was perhaps the biggest lead the family had since that fateful night of the fire. Here in their possession was a picture of a man who bore a striking resemblance to Louis Sodder. The man had dark curly hair, dark brown eyes, and had the same shaped nose, as well as the same upward tilt of the left eyebrow. The pair were absolutely convinced that Louis was trying to reach out to his mother through a cryptic message and photo. The pair decided to hire another private investigator to try and track down the man they were sure was Louis. The private eye was tasked with going to Kentucky and did so, but unfortunately for the Sodders, they would never again see the investigator. Worried that by publishing the letter or naming the place where the letter came from would harm their son, they decided to instead update the billboard with the image of the man they believed to be Louis, as well as hanging an enlarged copy of the image over their fireplace. It should be noted that authorities were still not convinced of foul play, and believed that the letter George and Jennie received was nothing more than a sick hoax. Tragically, George would die a year later, in 1969. Jennie would continue searching for answers until her eventual death in 1989. Sadly, neither would find the answers they both so desperately yearned for. Today, the youngest Sodder child and last surviving sibling, Sylvia Sodder, as well as her children and grandchildren, have vowed to keep searching for answers as to what happened that fateful night on Christmas, 1945. Sylvia is also convinced that her siblings were not killed in the fire that night. Her family believe that maybe the mafia tried to recruit George, who declined, or that George was targeted for his views about Mussolini. Another theory they have is that they may have tried to extort money from George, who refused, or that perhaps the children were kidnapped by someone they knew, who may have alerted the children to the fire and offered to take them someplace safe. I think it goes without saying that this is an extremely intriguing case, which after researching definitely left me with more questions than answers. I can only imagine the pain that George and Jennie felt while searching for definitive answers as to what happened to their children. I personally found it heartbreaking knowing that they never got the closure they desperately sought. George has said in an interview shortly before his death that time was running out for him and Jennie, and that ultimately, if the children did perish in the fire, they just needed to be convinced. However, if that was the case, there was so much strange behaviour leading up to and after the fire that I don't think that they could ever be truly convinced that that was the case, and I wouldn't blame them. How did the ladder get moved? Why didn't two perfectly working trucks work when needed most? Why did FJ Maurice want the family to stop investigating? Where did the other investigator go after leaving for Kentucky? One can only speculate. But I'd really like to know what you think. Please leave a comment below sharing your thoughts and theories. If you found today's case interesting, please leave a like and share this video. Please also consider subscribing for future videos, as it really helps out the channel. You can also check out my true crime playlist for more content like this. Finally, thank you so much for taking the time today to watch this video. Until next time, take care and goodbye. For now.